Now, I said to you that I'm a community activist also, besides a peace activist. Um, and it's the community side of me that has gotten me imbued with the Move the Money campaign. The Move the Money campaign is city based, not Washington based, although it's connected to Washington. But we're putting the pressure on the city because New York City, though it can't actually affect what happens in Congress, has a very important voice. It has a loud megaphone. So when New York City says that there is too much spending on Pentagon war budgets, which we all agree are bloated and beyond, occupying nearly 60% of the annual discretionary budget that Congress passes each year, year in and year out. 60%. That leaves virtually nothing or crumbs for the things that New Yorkers need and want. What am I talking about? Well, that's where my community activist part comes in. I'm talking about what I see on a day-to-day basis here. I see homeless. I see a mass transit system in the richest country in the world that should be the envy of the world. It should be modern. It should be free because it benefits the retailers and the office owners and the corporations that rent in those offices. It benefits them tremendously. So why don't they pay for it instead of transit riders, workers who go to work and home every day? But instead, it's in a shambles because it's not being funded. Why isn't it being funded? Well, our state and city political leaders claim that they don't have the money. There are many reasons they don't have the money. One is these skyscrapers that are around here are given 25-year tax abatements. Duh! Of course you don't have the money. You gave away our taxes. But a bigger reason is this huge lopsided priorities in Washington. And that's something that infects our entire country. So that it's not only a city problem that there's a shortage of funds, but a state problem and a federal problem. They're not spending money on the things that we need, which is healthcare. One of the few advanced industrialized countries without a national healthcare system, and the pandemic showed that our healthcare system is threadbare. People just fell through the hole. They died, 1 million of them, from the pandemic, and the rest of us, especially people of modest or no incomes, had nowhere to turn when that pandemic hit. And that was just an inkling of what has gone on for many, many years and is continuing now. It's a for-profit system, so what we need is a public system of healthcare as a human right. And that goes by the wayside when you're devoting your wealth of your country, as I said, the richest country in the world, to the military-industrial complex. And to others, tax cheats among the billionaires, giving them tax breaks when they should be paying a much larger burden of the tax than they do. So I look around my street and I see filthy streets. Why? Because under the Adams-Mayoralty and predecessors of it, there's been continuous cutbacks to the sanitation department. First to go when there are hard economic times. But that's a health issue. Our streets should be spotless. Our garbage should be containerized, not put on little plastic bags on the street. All of this takes money. And the federal government is one of the major beneficiaries of funding our city and giving it the funds needed. And so I see that. I see the subways, the buses. I see our schools. We should have 21st century schools in New York City. Small classes, teachers paid a good wage or a better wage than they make more because they're so important to the future generations. But again, I see teachers attacked as being greedy and that they're the main cause of our schools being in such a poor state. But that's just propaganda. The real truth, again, is that subways, mass transit goes wanting, sanitation goes wanting, schools go wanting. And what's the number one crisis now affecting New Yorkers? Affordable housing, the ability to live, not only work, but live in New York City and have lives of dignity and decent lives. Who can afford $2 and $3 and $4 and $5 and up $1,000 a month rents? Impossible. It's showing in the number of homeless out on our streets, but it's also showing in people moving away. The Times yesterday had a whole thing about the mass exodus of college-educated workers leaving the so-called super cities of, Los Angeles and New York, and heading to the red state towns of Phoenix and Dallas and so on.
So you look at all the problems that we have in the city, and we say that they could be affected by changing our national priorities for municipal needs instead of war. Pentagon budget goes down, our local budgets go up. How are our local council members going to make that move? How do we get there from here?
Well, as I said, New York City has a very loud voice, a megaphone. So for New York City to go on official record by passing this resolution that Move the Money is promoting, which is 423, repeated after me, Res 423. It now has 25 out of 51 council members on board. That includes Jumaane Williams, the public advocate, because he gets a vote in the city council, though he's not a council member. That's a significant chunk, but we need far more than that, and we need to impress the speaker to drop the stale excuses that have been used for not passing these types of resolutions. Oh, no, we have no effect on what happens in Congress. Oh, yes, we do. And not only that, what they do in Congress affects us directly. So we must pass this resolution. I'm confident that more council members will step up to the plate, see the plain truth of this resolution, that it puts our city on official record urging substantial cuts to the bloated Pentagon war budget that Congress devotes itself to year after year after year. Let New York City say no. We pay taxes, we want those taxes brought back to our city. Once this gets passed, and I'm confident that this year it will get passed, it failed in the last city council because the speaker then was diametrically opposed to getting it onto the floor, and what the speaker does is what gets done in the city council. We have a more progressive city council now. 25 have signed on. Let's get another 10 or 15 signed on. Let's put pressure on Adrienne Adams, the speaker, to put this on the floor. And then we will have a job to do, because that's the beginning of the fight. We have to publicize that. We have to hold public hearings sponsored by the city, which is part of the resolution, by the way. That lets the public know that they now have to shift their focus to Congress to get our...
So this is a first step.
This is the first step. The
But
real
first
fight
step,
goes on in Congress.
If you could describe it in a few words, step one is passing this resolution,
423.
423. Step two is getting who's going to be speaking at these public hearings and who's accountable to our city council.
Well, that remains to be seen who will speak there. The city council is mandated, should the resolution pass, to hold public hearings. Anybody can speak at a public hearing. I will speak at a public hearing. You might want to speak at a public
So
hearing.
who's our audience? Who do we hope to affect by having these public hearings?
We'd like the public consciousness to be raised as to what the big elephant in the room is, and that's militarism in our society and the devotion to the arms manufacturers. I note that Lockheed Martin and Raytheon shot down the Chinese balloon and then 3 other kids' balloons at the cost of $400,000 a pop. That they are making untold gains in their stock value with the advent of this war in Ukraine by shipping all these weapons there. I mean, somebody benefits. We don't benefit. We get impoverished. But these arm manufacturers, and they have a lethal grip on our Congress, obviously, that does their bidding year after year.
When we talk about the debt ceiling crisis that comes up, and we see that they're making cuts, or they're not changing the payments to all kinds of things, human needs that we have, and they're instead continuing to fund the military fully and then some. What do you think that comes from? Why can't we cut the military spending? Why can't we cut the Pentagon budget? We're not in a war, technically, right now.
It's very obvious to me that they have a lock grip on the Congress, on our representatives, who are supposed to represent us. But if you examine, that's the largest lobby in Washington. You have the oil industry, that's the other one, and that's part of that debt settlement also that they continued with their drilling in the Willow Project and the pipeline in West Virginia, which will blow a hole in attempts to deal with the climate crisis. Shame on Biden and the Democrats for allowing that to go through. And it's one reason why I opposed that settlement. It took out the deficit on the backs of poor people those who can least afford that, making more onerous demands on them while they already have their heads below water and are struggling to breathe. But what is the elephant in the room? Those two wars in Iraq and Afghanistan shot a $8 trillion hole in the budget and in the deficit, adding to the deficit. And so they pretended that should be sacrosanct. They didn't pretend. They made it sacrosanct, that budget. Not to be touched, expanded. Where is the deficit crisis? Oh, it must be those poor people who are stealing from us on food stamps. We're going to force them to go back to work at minimum wage, which hasn't been raised since 19 whatever, at $7 an hour. They get more by not working on food stamps than they get by going to work. It's an outrage. It's a scandal. It's beyond obscene. And that agreement was an obscenity and should not have been approved. I'm proud that our reps in Brooklyn voted against it, including my own new rep, Dan Goldman. Good reason that he voted against it. But they must raise the question of the military budget. If they don't do that, then there's no answer.
So who do they need to raise the question with?
Well, when New York passes that resolution, we should run with it and advertise it and put pressure on even our progressive House reps to be more vocal about it. You know, they yes us, they vote against the annual Pentagon budget, but do they take that to their constituents in any way? No, they're totally silent about it. I'm talking about Yvette Clarke, I'm talking about Nydia. It's never in their newsletters. These are the progressives. They know the truth. They vote against that budget, but then they take it back to their communities and point out that that's the reason for food stamp cutbacks and for Parks Department cutbacks and sanitation cutbacks and why our schools are failing and why our subways are horrible. No, they do not. So we want to take that victory, should we get it, in the City Council and run with it and put pressure on Congress, including our progressive reps, to tell them to be much more forthright and to show leadership and spine when it comes to taking on the military-industrial complex, which is the source of a lot of our misery today.